Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Gabriel, and I will be talking about the. This goes into painting fur to a higher standard, since almost all the model is fur texture. So first I painted the eyes, and I accomplished this by starting out with a yellow ochre. So if you watch my other videos, you've seen this before, but this is just a good yellow color. Um, it kind of has like a nice level of brightness, but feels very natural. And then I just um, increase that highlight with a golden yellow. You don't want to mix in too much white, simply because it will reduce the saturation of the yellow, and I thought having really bright yellow eyes would kind of draw attention to that. And then of course I just use like a darker gray to dot in the eyes. One thing that's important is you don't want very thick paint when you're um, tracing those eyes out. You want consistency that can flow, that you can draw on a piece of paper with. If it's very scratchy when you try and apply it, or when it just when it's like soaks the paper like a watercolor, that's not the right consistency. So that's a good way of testing if that's the right level of thinness you want when you're painting the eye. Now we're going on to basically the rest of the model. And to start, I'm using a series of gray tones. So I just have my black and white, and I do throw in some wolf gray from Army Painter here or there, but I didn't want to make it too bluish because hair is not naturally that blue, but I thought it would be good to have a cooler color, since on Grey Wolf's card, like the card you use in the game, the art has kind of like a cooler tone to it. So I just used it to kind of introduce that tone into the white and black, since they are very neutral, so the grays they create will be neutral. So that will give you that kind of colder perspective. So what we did was we started out by just filling in the different areas. So the main scheme I went for, following the art, was have kind of a darker, how do I describe it? Like the top of his back behind his head would be dark, and then it would kind of follow down the spine and to the tail, have like kind of a dark line, and then the shoulders of his front legs, those would also be kind of darker, and then I'll just blend it lighter and lighter until the end of the tail and the Grey Wolf's chest. That would be a lighter color. And so to accomplish this, you just mix the colors beforehand, so you have like a near black, a dark gray, more medium gray, a lighter gray, a very light gray, and then pure white. So when you have this nice set of grays to work with, you can just apply it on a certain area, then clean the brush off quickly, apply the next area, and so you're constantly blending it in. Now here I'm applying a wash, and so I didn't want to add too much brown, so I didn't use a brown wash, I used a black wash. And this darkened Grey Wolf down quite a bit more than I initially wanted, but it actually works really well because uh, you bring it down to almost the darkest that you want, and then you can bring it back up with highlighting. Notice here that I'm using a clean brush just to get rid of the um, wash where there's too much, and I want to kind of limit how dark those areas get. So I just suck it up with a clean brush. So now we're going back and we're painting on, we're increasing that brightness, and you might think you're making Greywind look like a cow. There's just these terrible spots of gray and bluish gray, but if you look at the final model here, you don't see that at all. I'm just dry brushing from here on out, essentially. And what this allows me to do is very finely pick out that the very edge of that texture. So instead of catching the entire kind of lock of hair that's been modeled in, it's just the very edges, the very crispiest parts. And the more I dry brush, the more the pigment catches and the more area it has. Depending on how bright that color you have, um, you want to just bring that up another level and just keep stepping it up gradually. So if you have a very pale color, you're going to go even brighter. And if you have that darker color on the back, you're going to start with like a medium gray. And so you're going to build that up with continuous layers. And so you might see the brightest highlights on that black area, but it's not going to be a dark gray and then a pure white. You're going to see those different levels of highlighting working to kind of blend it all in. So as I go through, I just pick out those areas that I want to highlight more, and I just keep adding brighter and brighter, especially near the face and on top of the head. I'll kind of roughly blend it in, and it's a very good idea not to be too precise about this because hair is not naturally regular. It doesn't grow with a specific pattern for the most part. Really, it's supposed to be chaotic and have varying hues. Next, I'm just adding that final layer of highlight, and I'm doing so with my detail brush, and I've added a very bright gray to it, almost white, and I'm basically just picking out the very bright parts of the hair that I want to kind of give that extra boost to. And you have to really layer on those highlights because every time it dries, it kind of tones down a little bit, and you want to build that brightness up. And when you add multiple layers, it'll make it brighter and brighter. It won't have the same opacity as one or two layers of black will, or very strong pigment. For highlight colors, you really need to build it up over layers to make it look natural and to make it really bright. Now we're going on to the mouth, and I'm using Murder's Magenta from P3. I'm very glad to actually be using this, and I'm very happy with the effect. It might look a little bizarre at first, but when it dries, it gives you that nice fleshy dark color. And I also use this in the ears as well. I just kind of darkened it down and put it in there, and it kind of has a nice natural look to it. You could use different flesh colors. You could use Bugman's Glow even, but I prefer kind of giving this going a little differently here. And for highlighting the magenta, I just mix in a little white, and then I basically just catch a good amount on the tongue, since there aren't many areas to highlight here. But you could do a little extra work highlighting the ears on the inside, but it's not entirely necessary. Now we're going on to the teeth. This is a little hard because some of the teeth in some areas are a little bit hard to kind of pick out. So you'll just have to be careful when you're painting it in. But I used yellow, ochre, and white, and I basically gave it like a pale yellow color to start off with, and then I basically just use white to kind of give a very, very bright yellow, basically just a slightly off white. Use that to highlight the teeth. So that about wraps it up. As you can see, with a pretty limited color palette, you can create very nice effect. And you don't have to follow this process precisely. I really recommend experimenting and trying to play with things, but just remember that you want to have a good amount of contrast. You want to make the hair look natural without going over too painfully. I think the randomness really helps. You can of course choose your own color scheme, and don't forget to base your models. I realized it's much easier to do it in batches, so when I finish a few more characters, I'll get the glue out and the basing stuff. And well, that's all for this video. I hope you learned something. I certainly did when painting these models. I also had a hand at summer, and as you can see, I incorporated like a brown tone into it. I might need to work on the highlighting a bit more, but as you can see, it's really easy to mess with the tones and try and create interesting variations, and just have a lot of fun, because fur is really something you can play with and be messy, and it really shouldn't turn out too poorly in the end. So that is all for now. I hope to see you again. Happy painting, and goodbye.